There is no other organisation in the world like the Mindfulness Initiative.
So what makes MI's presence and efforts essential? Why is it essential?
We're a think and do and be tank as well, because it's mindfulness.
Where are we now? What new evidence is out there? How do we produce recommendations that we can really follow through and actually see what impact those recommendations have and are going to have as we move forward?
Using the Mindful Nation UK report and subsequent briefing papers, worked with politicians to advocate the recommendations in there to actually get policy changed.
But parliamentarians have also said to us that if it's just about the well-being of parliamentarians, it's not good enough.
Because one of the things that I found working in the mindfulness space is trying to find that credibility behind mindfulness beyond just the well-being aspect.
We've seen global pandemics, we've seen a global political landscape that's probably more uncertain than it's certainly been in modern history.
And I found the Mindfulness Initiative and then found all of the sort of the reports and everything and the aspiration to do things beyond just ourselves. And that was what resonated with me, because that's how I believe mindfulness should work. It's beyond ourselves and it's about communities and wider.
We will move forward as an organisation and actually make an impact as we've made an impact in the past. We will make an impact now and we will make an impact as we move forward, because that's what we do.
So welcome to today's call. I'm Kareen and I'm the trustee for the Mindfulness Initiative. And we're gathered here today to discuss our efforts and future direction. We have the wonderful Richard Edwards and Jamie Bristow with us today. Could you just both introduce yourselves? Tell us both a bit about yourselves. Starting off with you, Jamie.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jamie Bristow. I was the director for 8 years of the Mindfulness Initiative from around 2015 to last year. I now support the Mindfulness Initiative as an advisor, as a policy expert, particularly looking at sustainability and the applications to the climate crisis.
Thank you, Jamie. And Richard?
Yes, well, I'm Richard Edwards, and I've been the director of the Mindfulness Initiative since last October. So, not very long. So finding my feet, moving a way forward. Yeah, so that's where I'm at.
Right, thank you. And thanks for both being here today. Okay, so to anyone who doesn't actually know what the Mindfulness Initiative is or what they do, how would you describe this to them in kind of anyone who's unfamiliar with us?
The Mindfulness Initiative formed to be a kind of policy institute or think tank to help politicians to look at the application of mindfulness in different areas of public life. And that's really been the bread and butter of the organization in the last 10 years. Having inquiry hearings in Parliament, bringing together experts, scientists, policymakers, making recommendations for change in briefing papers and policy documents. It's done a lot more besides, and often people talk about think tanks being think and do tanks, because you actually are creating programs, helping people with we created like toolkits and guidelines and that kind of thing. But I mean, the joke can go, we're a think and do and be tank as well, because it's mindfulness, of course. And there are ways in which there's a particular type of conversation, a particular type of convening, which is not just talking about it, but practicing it at the same time.
Oh, that's excellent, Jamie. Richard, anything to add to that?
No, I think Jamie's hit it on the head, really. I mean, if I was to sum it up in one sentence, it would be, we're here to advocate for and nurture mindfulness-based approaches and the best practice in mindfulness-based approaches and innovation within that in order to transform public and social policy.
As we have the discussion, what I wanted to understand first and foremost is, why did you become involved in the MI? Let's get into that a little bit. Richard, you being here only relatively new, what made you become involved in the MI?
Well, prior to being in the MI, I've run a homelessness organisation for 15 years, so very much frontline, working with people who are experiencing homelessness, not because they haven't got a roof over their head, but because they can't sustain a roof over their head. And I did that for a long time, challenging work, stressful work, and I have chronic health conditions myself. So I came to mindfulness as a way of managing my physical and mental health and workplace stress, and really saw the benefits of that, and really saw how that affected me individually. So I trained to be a mindfulness teacher and became a huge advocate for the benefits of mindfulness, not just in terms of me, but in terms of how it could help people experiencing complex lives, who've experienced compound trauma, and actually looked at the benefits of mindfulness in that. And I did that for quite a while, and I became aware that it's all very well working with individuals to make them more resilient, but actually, there comes a point where you need to do something more. So, the analogy I like is the analogy of a flower growing in the garden. And that if that flower isn't thriving, if it's not doing well, you can talk to it, you can be kind to it, you can water it, you can give it fertilizer. But there comes a point where the environment needs to change, where that flower is in the wrong environment. And so, the idea of the Mindfulness Initiative working to change the landscape, to mean that we don't have to work with people to build their resilience, that actually we might be able to change some of the structure in society to actually enable the flowers to thrive in a better way. So that's what attracted me to the Mindfulness Initiative, that, it's not just about bottom-up work. That bottom-up work is actually vital, but some of that top-down work is really important too.
I love that, but there are lots of numerous organisations doing things in mindfulness. That's what I've seen. So, what makes MI's presence and efforts essential? Why is it essential that you do this, Richard? I'll ask you first.
I think there are a number of organisations that work in different areas of mindfulness on different mindfulness-based approaches, and we have chosen to step back from that, I suppose, and actually look at the landscape and where mindfulness sits on a much broader landscape. So we're not developing a particular program, we're not developing or advocating for a particular way of working with mindfulness. We're obviously looking for good practice. We're obviously looking for innovation, because sometimes when you get involved in a particular approach, you get lost in that approach and you don't see what you don't see. So as an organisation, it means we can take that step back and look at the broader landscape. But actually what we're here to do is to look at changing that landscape in terms of looking at how mindfulness can influence public and social policy, not just individual lives, or address different medical issues that people face that mindfulness can be hugely beneficial to, but actually look at that broader landscape. And I think that's where our uniqueness comes in.
Okay, so let's talk about a bit of the history of MI. As someone who, like myself, is relatively new to being a trustee, it would be great, Jamie, to hear from you about some of those key projects, those key initiatives, key things that you think that have been achieved over the last sort of 10 years, which is a significant time, a significant contribution.
Yes, it's yeah. So stretching back to the early days, then this all started with the policy inquiry with politicians of the All-Party Group in 2014, and the subsequent launch or publication of the Mindful Nation UK report. Now, that was the first public policy report about mindfulness in society. It looked at health, education, criminal justice, and the workplace. And now, looking back, actually, it's probably the first public policy report about kind of anything to do with inner development in general, or the ways in which we might be able to cultivate heart and mind for societal good. And that formed a profound foundation, a platform from which we could then go on to do further work, to have further inquiries in Parliament, to look at more nuanced areas within those four sectors I mentioned, and expanding to new sectors. So, for instance, mindfulness in emergency services and blue light services, as they're called in the UK. And the inquiry amongst politicians also extended not just to what mindfulness could do out there, out in society, but they started to become interested in how mindfulness could be helpful in here, in Parliament itself. And so we started to support them to think about mindfulness in political culture, in Parliament, political process. And we, around the same time, we were also contacted by politicians and advocates from many other parliaments and legislatures who were interested in the experience in the British Parliament of the teaching program initially, that has now had well, getting on for 400, I think, MPs and members of the House of Lords take part, and also the policy program that then the Mindfulness Initiative helped to spin out of that. And so my political colleagues and colleagues in the Mindfulness Initiative visited the other parliaments, spoke to politicians, inspired many of them to start their own training programs. And we also convened them in Westminster. I think it was 2017 or so. We had 40 politicians from 14 countries come together to practice with John Kabat-Zinn hosting and having a shared inquiry about how the implications of this personal work for collective ends. And we that became kind of front page news, the fact that we were doing that at all. And we also used this platform to support specifically the private sector, creating a sort of toolkit resource and something called the Mindful Workplace Community to help skillful implementation in the private sector. And we advocate using the Mindful Nation UK report and subsequent briefing papers, worked with politicians to advocate the recommendations in there to actually get policy changed. And so, for instance, in healthcare, back in 2014, it was clear that there weren't enough mindfulness teachers who could teach MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and there weren't enough National Health Service trusts taking it seriously. And in collaboration with other organizations like the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, we contributed to policy change. And so there was a national program of mindfulness teacher training in the health services, which addressed that gap, that sort of deficit of mindfulness teachers. And then moving forward to closer to the present day, having done that inquiry, assessment of research, recommendations on subjects where the evidence base was clearest, like depression or anxiety or long-term health concerns, we then started to extrapolate, or rather build a narrative case for how mindfulness could help to address more kind of long-term complex issues like the climate crisis and our sustainability predicament, and published really sort of landmark or game-changing documents like Mindfulness, Developing Agency in Urgent Times, and Reconnection, Meeting the Climate Crisis Inside Out, which have, I've been told, been used in UN agencies and government departments for thinking about how inner transformation and outer transformation can better be integrated in our collective solutions.
So, gosh, we heard so much about the foundations before. So, your work's cut out for all of us, really, Richard, but you especially. What's to come now? What's needed, do you think?
Well, I think Jamie's laid out really carefully what the foundations that we're standing on, and that's absolutely amazing. And now I think what we need to be starting to do is really drill down and measure the impact of that. Actually look at 4 areas, I suppose. One is around circling back to the Mindful Nation UK report and looking at specific policy areas, whether that's health or education or other policy areas, and saying, where are we now? What new evidence is out there? How do we produce recommendations that we can really follow through and actually see what impact those recommendations have and are going to have as we move forward? So getting the experts around the table, the right experts in the right policy areas and having MI policy forums. The second one is around the use of the Mindfulness All Party Parliamentary Group and the work that that's done. And that work has been amazing.
Yeah.
And Westminster can be seen as a toxic working environment, but it's not just that, you know. And there is an argument to say if mindfulness works there, it can work in any workplace, and that's really quite valid. But parliamentarians have also said to us that if it's just about the well-being of parliamentarians, it's not good enough. So what we need to be doing is, in terms of measuring that impact, is bringing those recommendations to the all-party parliamentary group and saying, get us in the room with the people that make the decisions, get us in the room with the people that affect policy, and we want to measure the impact. We want to see the changes on the ground and using that connection within Westminster to actually drive those changes forward. And the third one is around innovation, because as mindfulness evolves, as the landscape changes, we want to see mindfulness reach sections of society that mindfulness just hasn't touched yet. And the last area is about the global work that Jamie touched on. So much good work has been done there, but we live in really unprecedented times. We've seen global pandemics, we've seen a global political landscape that's probably more uncertain than it's certainly been in modern history. We see a climate crisis across the planet, and we see global conflicts. So therefore, that work in terms of connecting mindfulness practitioners connected with legislature around the world is really, really important if we're going to join together and actually look at what works within different systems to actually get good practice that can actually affect some of those global issues that we're really tackling at the moment.
That's wonderful to hear, Richard. Thanks for sharing that, because definitely that your message around it becoming broader and also that impact, I think it's so important to understand what difference is this going to make now as we go into the future of our organisation and all the things that we need to achieve. So thank you for sharing that. So what's next for you, Jamie? I mean, your work has taken this complementary path, you know, to the MI. So just tell us a little bit about that, and also just reflecting on the importance of MI's work going forward, or you know, tell us more about your follow-on work. It'd be great to hear.
Yeah, thank you, Kareen. After 8 or 9 years working with the Mindfulness Initiative, I felt it was time for me to look at some of the other approaches and aspects of what you might call the intersection of inner and outer transformation. So I've been working with the inner development goals. I've been writing papers for and doing research for other groups like the Climate Majority Project and Earth for All and the Club of Rome. And through that work over the last year and a half, I have got a kind of a sense for the evidence base and the kind of applications that are sitting alongside mindfulness and trying to meet some social issues. And it's clear that mindfulness is kind of really out ahead in terms of the evidence that's available, in terms of how ready it is to scale in many ways. And so although it's been very interesting, I'm appreciating having this sort of broader scope of my work. It's super important still that experts and organizations like the Mindfulness Initiative retain that deep expertise and are understanding the nuances of how to apply this well, how to roll it out. And so I'm looking forward to collaborating with the Mindfulness Initiative in these new roles that I have taken on. Like I say, because mindfulness has been out in the vanguard, and will continue to be so. So so my work will continue to be as an advisor, I hope, to Richard and his colleagues.
Oh, wonderful, Jamie. Absolutely. We definitely will still want that. And it's about that collectively, isn't it? It's about us all collectively doing our part. So thank you, Jamie. Richard, did you want to say anything on that?
No, I just I'm really keen to follow Jamie's work as he does stuff, because Jamie's work is amazing, and so and have the opportunity to continue working with Jamie as a policy expert for us will be really important, I think, as we move forward. So I'm glad we're still best buddies, as we say in Wales, and that we will support each other as best we can.
Right. Richard, as we're slowly coming to a close on this conversation, what are the challenges do you see now for the Mindfulness Initiative? How can people best support this work?
That's a really good question, and I think there are challenges facing all of us all of the time, and we can dwell on the challenges that we face, or we can just turn towards them and actually look at what we've got and how we move forward with that. But there are challenges that we do face. We're not an organisation, as I said earlier, that sells training. We're not an organisation that markets a particular product. We're also not an organisation that's out there in community centres working with people on the coal face, so to speak. We're actually about creating a landscape. So we rely really, really heavily on people that understand the value of the work that we do, that understand the value of changing that landscape, understand the value of affecting social and public policy around mindfulness. And so there's work to be done with grant making trusts in terms of approaching them and getting them to understand the value of the work that we do. But we also need to rely on our supporter base of partner organisations, of individuals that get it, that can actually support our work. Because without that understanding, without that resonance in the mindfulness community, we can't do the work that we need to do moving forward. And we will do that work. By hook or by crook, we will move forward as an organisation and actually make an impact. As we've made an impact in the past, we will make an impact now, and we will make an impact as we move forward, because that's what we do.
That's wonderful, Richard. Thank you.
So, Kareen, you've asked us about, what drew us to the Mindfulness Initiative. I'm going to throw that question back at you now and say, why are you here? Why did you want to be a trustee of the Mindfulness Initiative? What was it that drew you in?
Yeah, Richard, I think I didn't sort of have an aspiration to be a trustee of the Mindfulness Initiative, but I stumbled on the Mindfulness Initiative through, on the internet, and saw all of the work, because one of the things that I found working in the mindfulness space is trying to find that credibility behind mindfulness beyond just the well-being aspect, especially if you're working with sort of organisations and things and business leaders and stuff. So I was looking for that, seeing if it existed, and I found the Mindfulness Initiative, and then found all of the sort of the reports and everything, and the aspiration to do things beyond just ourselves. And that was what resonated with me, because that's how I believe mindfulness should work. It's beyond ourselves, and it's about communities and wider. So I wanted to see if I could learn about that, because I think it's all about that learning, but also how I could contribute to that, coming from a space of non-academia and not 20 years of mindfulness space, and being out in communities and bringing sort of more representation and maybe more diverse thinking to how we may approach so I felt like it's something, if I had the opportunity to do, and luckily Richard, you were open to that, and stuff, then I felt for me it was just great to understand that actually that work is taking place, and we should be shouting about that in some way or form, because there's definitely not enough said. I think it's sitting somewhere, but maybe not coming further down into places where people could anchor and use some of this work and approaches or insights and learning and way of looking at it. I think there's just so much opportunity there now. So yeah, for me, it's really an exciting opportunity.
I think that's really interesting, and I think some ways there, Kareen, you've touched on the uniqueness of the Mindfulness Initiative and what it does. I wonder, Jamie, whether you've got anything to say about the uniqueness of the work that we do.
There is no other organization in the world like the Mindfulness Initiative. It has been well out there on its own, and it is still really the only dedicated public policy institute looking at mindfulness compassion in multiple areas of public policy. And you have some organizations that might have particular interest in education settings, and we have colleagues in the Foundation for a Mindful Society in the US looking at applications in cities. But the credibility of having the links in with Parliament and with politicians, being seen by people in the policymaking world as being where the experts sit when it comes to mindfulness and compassion, and our track record and our network, not just across the UK but around the world, and now internationally with politicians in other countries too. These are really unique attributes, and the conditions that came together to make this even possible in the first place were quite rare. And so the Mindfulness Initiative continues to have a unique leadership role in the UK, but also globally.
So I want to say a big, massive thank you to Jamie and Richard for this conversation today. Even I've been enlightened to hear the journey of the past, but also what that's going to help for the future and some of those key things that we're looking to see. So all I would say to everybody that's joined us today is a big, massive thank you. And we will be sharing our strategy in the near future. So please stay tuned. If you haven't registered on our newsletter, make sure that you do. And thank you for joining.